Developing Tomorrow's Leaders is a podcast that is all about educating, supporting, and inspiring the next generation of leaders. Your host, Antoine Thompson, or Coach T, has over 35 years' experience of educating, supporting, inspiring, and enhancing the lives of many young men and women. Join Coach T and his village of inspiration.
Welcome to Developing Tomorrow's Leaders. I am your host, Antoine Thompson, or Coach T. Today, I have a wonderful guest who I actually was a guest on her podcast, and it was only natural that I reciprocate and invite her to be on with me because we can continue our conversation that we had on her podcast. Well, a little about her. Her name is Bryce Hamilton. She is a licensed clinical social worker with 15 years of practice in Leawood, Kansas. As the mother of four children, Bryce brings both professional expertise and personal experience to her work, offering compassionate and insightful perspectives on mental health and well being. She, as I mentioned, is the host of a podcast called Accidental Experts with Bryce Hamilton, where she delves into meaningful conversations about parenting, personal growth, and life challenges. Her mission is to empower others through thoughtful dialogue, expert advice, and genuine passion for helping people thrive. With that, I am excited to welcome Bryce Hamilton to Developing Tomorrow's Leaders. Hello, Bryce.
Hi, welcome. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're acting like you're hosting your
I
podcast. You
know,
should do
so
it. I
sorry.
love it.
I got into my podcast role.
Yeah, that's okay. Hey, podcaster to podcaster, I'm cool with it. That means we have a great conversation. I thoroughly did enjoy my time on your podcast, and it's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on because it was such a great conversation. You got some great questions. Really, it was just a conversation. And I just wanted to pick up on that and also find out more about the work that you're doing because I think it's amazing that you do because it takes a certain kind of person to take on and do the work that you do. So I do applaud you for that.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad to be here. Yeah, it's I enjoyed our conversation as well. So it was such a privilege to be welcomed onto your show. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to get to. I don't always start with it, but I'm going to now just really because of what you do. Again, why it's so important. What is your why behind your reasoning for wanting to get into being a social worker?
Yeah, so I have been doing this for a long time, and honestly, I didn't start at this place. When I was in college, I actually imagined myself designing hospitals for wellness, and I knew mental health mattered, but I wanted to be more on the aesthetic side of that. And then as I was in that program, I realized actually this isn't what I want to do, and I can't sit at a desk all day. I really need to be out there helping people. And I was like, what can I do? I could be a teacher, I could be a therapist. And I was like, eh. And then the more I researched it and talked to people, I was like, actually, that's exactly what I want to do. Like, I want to get into the messy parts of people's lives and help them to learn how to do it the way they'd like it to be, teach them the skills that they don't have, and support them and be there through their journey. So that was my why. And then I've been doing that for over 15 years. And I think as my time as a therapist has evolved, I've realized that not everybody has the privilege to be in therapy. It really is a privilege. And I think a lot of people don't have access to the information that I realized that I knew. And so I was like, how can I make a better impact or a bigger impact or help more people? And so I jokingly to my best friend said, we should do a podcast. And she was like, yes, you should do a podcast. And I was like, no, you were supposed to say no. That was a no question. And then I couldn't get it off my mind. And so I think that when something keeps coming back to you, it means something. Like you should really take life up on that, right? And do something with that. And so my husband was like, please, Bryce, just do the podcast. And so I did, and I am loving it. Like I have had such a privilege to help impact families' lives, and parents are reaching out to us to ask for more topics to be covered and telling us how much the information we're covering is helping them. So that's our why.
Yeah, that's amazing. And a lot of what you just said really resonates with my reason for what I'm doing too. And reason I got into podcasting is it's a way to expand on what you're doing and you're caring about what you do and knowing that there are people that may not have access if you don't have a podcast where they can get the information readily without having to go, well, do I have to pay to get this or just to find out just basic information sometimes to
Yeah.
determine, hey, how much more work or help do I need?
Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes you do need therapy, right? Sometimes you do need more services, but I felt like there's some things that we can definitely educate people on that is just a conversation, just like a knowledge point, right? Just accidentally becoming an expert in their kid. And so that's yeah, that's why I'm here and I'm so glad that you're doing what you're doing too because I love your mission of developing
Yeah.
Mars leaders. I think that's so important.
Yeah, and I think when we were talking when I was on your podcast and you were asking some questions and the way you asked the questions again is why I want you to have you on because like she gets it, you know. I mean, not obviously you do because you're a professional, but it's so nice to be able to have a conversation with someone that understands the reason why you do something and more importantly why it's important
Mhm.
that there are other people that are directly connected to some people that want to help and I think it's one of those things that a lot of people today, the way the social climate is now, I think it's even more important because, you know, people are becoming more recluse because they don't feel comfortable reaching out and to know that there are outlets like and resources like yourself and myself and others. I'd like to think we're making people more comfortable to share.
Yeah, I love that idea. I think one of the things that we don't do super well as a society is talk about emotions. And I think being able to express ourselves, being able to put a word to what we're experiencing is so important. And it helps us to start processing or metabolizing what we're going through. Even though it's not therapeutic in itself to say our emotion, it actually helps our brain to start unwinding that experience or start coming up with skills or tools or supports that we can have or need by putting an emotion to it. And so I think that's one of the things that is so important. And I think by COVID helped us to recluse a lot more, I think. And so, especially kids and teens now did not get as much social experience in those really important years. And so they're not as comfortable with expressing themselves, and everybody's just fine if you ask them, right? But are they really just?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I think that there are times where we are struggling. We need help. We need support. We need to cry. We need to be upset about something. And we need help finding a solution to the problem we're going through.
Yeah, and you actually you must be reading my mind because I was going to ask you and tell you about a social experiment that I'm doing just for myself,
Hmm.
and I just want you to really just take and run with it because you actually just touched the tip of the iceberg, if you will. So when I go to a grocery store, if I go to a convenience store, and there is a teenager or a young adult that's behind the counter. I will engage them like you and I are having a conversation, like I would with anybody else. And I do it for the sole purpose to see what kind of engagement am I going to get in return based on my approach. And
Hmm.
it's always very upbeat. Hey, how are you today? And I can honestly tell you, probably 7 out of 10 times, I get nothing or very little. And it's not like, it's like, or something negative, believe it or not. It's like, hey, how are you doing? I'll be fine in about 2 hours when I get off work, you know, as opposed to, you know, just being happy to be there. Or it's, you know, whatever. But, you know, every now and again, there's somebody that's really excited to have a conversation. But it goes to your point, the social interaction has been lost for a lot of kids over the years. And it's masterized itself to a point where they can't have just a general social conversation with a stranger.
Hmm. Yeah, my kids in my practice will say it's so awkward. It's weird, right? And being somebody who did not grow up in the time of COVID or being separate from people, like our interactions are more online now than they used to be. Like we had to be able to talk to adults. We had to be able to start a conversation. And I in those I do something similar to what you do. I always try to chat up the people that are at the cash register or the convenience store or, our hostess or the waiter, and I'll say, I'll be like, "How's your day going?" And they're like, "Oh, fine." And I'm like, "Do you like working here?" And they're like, "Do you want a real answer?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I want a real answer. Like, what's it like to work here?" And they're like, "Why are you asking me?" And I'm like, "I'm just curious about you." Right. And they're like, "No one's ever asked me that before." And I'm like, "Well, it matters to me. I care if you like this job." And they're like, "Why?" And I was like, "I don't know. You're a human being and you matter because you exist." And I think a lot of times people are taken back by that, but a lot of times they'll say things. And we have had, my husband and I do date nights normally on Thursday nights. We get a babysitter and we go out on a date. And we have started kind of chatting up the waiters, and they have been lovely human beings, like so great and generous with recommendations, so nice and helpful. And I think that they're not used to that experience of just being treated like a human. But I can't help but
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. No, I totally can understand that. Now, I will tell you the flip side of that is there's our food line, which is right up the road where we go. There's this other young man. He's in college and he just loves to talk when you go through. And I always go through his line because when you engage him, he just gets so excited. He tells you about everything that's going on in his family, where they're going, and all these things like that. And it's just so great to see young people happy, and that's why I like him. It makes me feel better because when I leave, I know he's even more upbeat because he's got to engage somebody.
Mhm.
And that's what you kind of hope. And you probably had you and your husband probably on those date nights come across people and they really appreciate the fact
Mhm.
that you care enough to want to have a conversation with them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. And I just like, I don't know. I am definitely an extrovert, right? And I married an introvert. So he like comes along.
Same, yeah,
Right?
same here.
Yeah. So it's like it's fun to see the questions that he comes up with. And like we always try to ask something about the menu, even if we like what's your favorite thing here? Right. And sometimes that starts a conversation. But just I don't know. I think that something that really has made a difference in my parenting style, but also how I practice as a therapist and just who I am as a human is to be curious about other people.
Right. Yeah, you really have to. That's interesting. But yeah, we both did the same. I'm an extrovert. My wife is definitely an introvert. And I meant to tell you, I was voted most outgoing in high school my senior year.
I love
And it's, yeah, so I'm kind of like, but it's just who I am. And people, I've had a couple people like, man, I just wish I could be like you. I'm like, you can be
yeah.
if you choose to be. There are certain things that kind of get to you. But you bring up a great way to shift the conversation. Something you said as a parent, your children are young,
Hmm.
so you understand the importance and how impressionable they are and influential they are at their ages now, and that social interaction is so important. How do you, as a clinical social worker and therapist, how do you parent but also not be that professional?
Hmm.
I mean, I know that's a hard situation to be in at times.
Yeah. Well, what's funny is I was interviewing people for my podcast this week, and one of the women that I was interviewing was asking me, like, as a side bar to our actual conversation, she was like, "How do you turn the therapist off when you go home?" And I was like, "You can't, because the truth is that I've always been this person. This is exactly who I've always been. It's just that I learned the skills and the wording for what was happening. I always observed the things that I observe now. Maybe I'm better at it now, but I always did that. So it's hard for me to turn it off. But I mean, I'm a human too, right? So, like, are there times where I get mad at my kids? Yes. Are there times where I'm anxious about something? Yes, right? Like, are there times where I am crying about something? Absolutely. Right? So I think it is both. My kids have been raised by a therapist, but also like my job is as a mom, and I see those things very in alignment. I don't see them in conflict with each other, but sometimes I, because really my perspective as a therapist is about curiosity, and I don't think that that can go wrong in parenting, right? So when my kids are like, "I had a horrible day at school," I'm like, "What's up? Like, what happened? Like, tell me about that. I want to hear about that." They tell me whatever it is, and I'm like, "Oh gosh, how did that make you feel?" and they tell me whatever it was, and I'm like, what do you think you're going to do about that? Right? So I think curiosity as a therapist, when I'm not trying to like psychoanalyze them or tell them where they're going wrong or what they should be doing better, I think those things might get in the way. But when my perspective is curiosity, I don't think it can get in the way.
The one thing you mentioned there, which is I think is great, your response when you say they had a bad day, you're like, well, tell me about it and how did it make you feel? It's not so much about them wanting you to tell them. Sometimes it's about just having that dialogue because they come to a realization that sometimes, most of the time, they have the answer.
Mhm.
They're afraid to, verbalize, what it may be because they're afraid of being wrong.
Yeah.
I'm a big advocate of make a decision right, wrong, or indifferent because either way you're going to learn from it,
Mhm.
regardless of what decision you make. And 9 times out of 10, in the long run, you're like, gosh, I really appreciate that because now I realize I am in control of my own destiny, and I don't have to rely on people as much. That's not to say that you don't. You still need the guidance and leadership of the adults in your lives, but you still have the ability to make decisions. And I always encourage kids to do that. But at the same time, making sure they understand you still live under your parents' roof. Don't go in there and say, Coach T said, I can do whatever I want. And if you got a problem with it, call him because I'll never answer the phone.
Yes, yeah. Well, and I think like a lack of decision is a decision. I think that's something
True.
that kids and adults sometimes, like when you're struggling with something, not making a decision means somebody else or something else is going to make a decision for you. And I don't know about you, but I do not like other people being in control of my life. I don't want other people to make decisions for me. I want to be the person, even if it's wrong. I want to be like, yeah, I kind of screwed up there. That was a huge mistake. Or yeah, I could have done that better. Or like, I'm really proud of myself because I was scared, but I did it anyways.
Yeah, no, I'm 100%. I'm with you. I don't, because I always feel like we talk about leaders and followers. You be a leader or you be a follower. I tell every young person I work with, every middle schooler, high schooler, I say, hey, everybody's a leader in their own way. It's just a matter of when you find out when you step up and be that leader, and everybody leads differently.
Yeah. Well, I think empowerment is so important. And I there's a lot of ways that we empower our kids at our house to talk about their feelings, right? Like even if I don't agree with the feeling that they're having, I'm not going to argue about it because it's really real for them. Even if I'm like, I don't think that that really was scary. I mean, I've never said that, but imagining, right? Um, but it was scary for them. It does feel scary, and so part of my job is to believe in them and to empower them to be able to do the things that they need to do, which is also why I'm so curious about things because that allows me to subtly make suggestions or help them to believe in themselves. So when my kid says, well, at recess, my friends are kind of leaving me out and they're playing something else, or I don't really want to play that. I'm like, "Okay, well, what do you wanna do about that?" And they're like, "Well, I think I'm gonna just swing on the swings because that's, like, what I like to do the most." And I'm like, "Yeah, that sounds great. Like, what a great idea." And, if you do that and you don't like it, do you think you could do something different the next day? And they're like, "Yeah." I mean, because I can choose anything. I could go on the slide or I could play gaga ball or whatever, and I'm like, "Yeah, that's cool. I think this is great. Let's try it out. See what happens." Right? So I think I agree with you in that, like, allowing them to construct their own life. We're kind of like the guardrail, I think, as parents, right? Like, we're trying to keep them in the lane as much as we can. And obviously, some of our kids are going to push us to grow. But I think that's also the most beautiful part of parenting or having this profound impact on kids' lives is that we don't have to be right. I really don't care about being right. It's really not about being right. It's about helping somebody else find their way, right? So being that support, that cheerleader, that guide, mentor. I love it when my kids ask me for help. Like that means a lot to me. And even my patients, when they ask me for help, they're like, okay, so I have this issue. And I'm like, bring it on. I'm ready. And they tell me what it is going on. I'm like, okay, so what do we do next? And they end up solving their own problem. Like, I love it. It's so amazing. But it's also because I believe in them. I'm like, I know you can handle this. Like, or they're doubting themselves, and I'm like, look, here's the deal. This is hard, but let's talk about the other 5 things that I can think of right off the top of my head that you have done that have been hard and you've rocked. And they're like, "Yeah, you're right. Okay, I think I can do this." And I'm like, "Okay, so what should we plan on for next week? Like if it's in a session." They'll be like, "Okay, well, I'm gonna do this thing. I'm gonna plan a cookie party with my friends, even though I'm kind of nervous because it's like a new group of friends that I have. But you're right, everybody likes cookies, so like we could totally do that." I'm like, "Yeah, okay, let's do it." I'm like, even if one person shows up, that's still a cookie party, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And then they're like, "Okay, yeah, I'm gonna do it." And then they come back and they're like, "Okay, our date is this." And I'm like, "Amazing. Like, I'm so proud of you. Like, you did all of this yourself." And then they're like telling me about all these other things, outings that they plan with friends or whatever. So I think I agree with you. Empowerment is so key.
yeah. Making them understand where they can share that empowerment role, back and forth. There was a few years ago, I stopped actively coaching 2 years ago. This is my second year, and I did that because I coach young men
Mhm.
through the sport of basketball and teach them life skills through sport. Well, when you impede upon that, the coach coaches, the officials officiate, the spectators spectate, and the parents parent.
Mhm.
But when the parents become the officials and the parents become the coach, then they've taken away your responsibility.
Mhm.
And when I got to that point, it was I can no longer effectively do what I want to do. Here's the irony: the success was still there, but the fun for me and the fun for the players was not there, and it was obvious. And they could see it in the way that I was coaching. And I knew if they could see that, I was not doing what I need to do. So I stepped back and I put my focus elsewhere. I say all that to say that the last couple of years that I was coaching, because I started seeing this pattern in the preseason parent meeting. I said, you know what? I'm not only going to instruct the parents how I'd like for them to behave as it relates to their sons and this team. I'm going to educate them as part of the process. I said, I'm happy for you to cheer. What I ask you not to do is coach from the stands, because I've shared with the boys, if they look in the stands, they won't play because they don't have my attention, they don't have their teammates' attention. And I said, I want you to understand why this is important, because there are 4 components that come into play every time they go out on the court. They're trying to please me, they're trying to please their teammates, they're trying to please you, but most importantly, they're trying to please themselves. And they cannot please four groups of people when everybody's trying to tell them one thing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally, totally agree with you. And I was kind of sitting back listening to this as a parent because my second oldest, who is my daughter, she just started playing volleyball this year. And I was one of the assistant coaches that helped. But really, I saw my role as a cheerleader. Like that was, I mean, even though we had several assistant coaches, so I wasn't always on the bench, but like telling them, like, hey, that was really great. Like, I was really proud of you for running to that ball or calling that ball or whatever that was, and just cheerily being a cheerleader. And I felt like my daughter enjoyed that experience so much that she wants to keep doing it, right? And so I was thinking about like how valuable that is as parents to be able to stay the parent. It's actually good, right? That means we let somebody who's really great at coaching be the coach, and we let somebody who's really great at being an official be the official, and we let our kids be themselves, and we show up to support the person we love.
Right. Yeah, and it just doesn't happen so much. Now you'll laugh at this one. I'll tell you how much it's changed. When I first started coaching in 1985, I coached an association team. My parents, my dad's in the military, but when he was home, my parents came to every game I coached. And when I got to high school, I still have the videos, VHS, that's how old they are. But whenever you go to a game, you can, games my mom was at, you could hear her over everybody, but she was always encouraging the players, and she knew none of them.
Hmm.
But she was supporting her son, but is supporting the team. And I share that to show how much it has changed.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I grew up in like the 90s, right? And 2000s. And so sports for me were still really fun. And when my daughter was playing volleyball, I said to my best friend that was there, I was like, "We should join our rec league for volleyball." And she was like, "Heck yeah." And because we still love it, right? Like nobody was critical of us. And I find in my practice that oftentimes kids who are really athletic, who excel in athletics, do not need us to criticize them. Like they're already the hardest, harshest critic, right? They know exactly where they went wrong. They know exactly where they feel like they failed. They know exactly what they should have done better. And they don't need us to reemphasize that. What they need us to do is tell them, I love you no matter what. That was great.
Yeah.
I'm proud of you. You matter. Whether you win or lose, that doesn't change how I feel about you. Because the reality is that that shouldn't matter, right? Like our kids, most of them are not going to become professional athletes. I hope that does not offend people. That is the truth, right? Like such a small percentage. But what we might be taking away from them is the opportunity to love that sport for their lifetime, right?
Yeah.
Because
No. Yeah.
leagues are fun. Being an adult coaching their kids, like we might be taking that away when what is their real objective? Like, why did we sign our kids up for sports when they're in first, second, third grade? What is it? Why do you think?
So you're asking me?
Yeah, what do you think?
Oh, I know why I would have my son or daughter sign up to play sports is to have fun, to meet new kids and enjoy it and make new friends and enjoy the sport, learn it and have fun.
Yeah.
No other expectations.
Yes. Like
Yeah.
learn a new skill, meet new people, have a good time, right? That should be what it is the whole time. Even as an adult signing up for a rec volleyball team, the goal is have fun, meet new people, and play the sport. Like get better, right? Be physically active. Those are the things that matter, right? Not whether a kid is going to become that professional sports player or not. And I think really it's them pushing because, I interviewed a physical therapist who was talking about she works with professional athletes. And she was talking about each professional athlete has to have some type of OCD kind of qualities where they want to do something repetitive over and over and over and over and over and over and over again to get it exactly perfect. Most of us do not want to do that. That is not fun for us, right? And that's okay. It doesn't need to be that way. But those people that are going to become those professional athletes probably have that quality of being able to shoot the basketball 500 times in a week. I mean, that does not sound fun to me, but that's what they're doing, right? Or something like that. I don't know what the real numbers are, but it's a
No,
lot.
you're, yeah, no, you're, no, you're, I'll give you a perfect example. I'm training this young man. He's the same kid. So he's a sophomore now. He worked out every Saturday. Sometimes he would come for a 2 hour session. Sometimes he'd come for two 2 hour sessions, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. And his dad would say, "Hey, when we come back in the afternoon, I'd like for him to get up 500 to 600 shots if we could." And this kid comes in and he is just
Mhm.
500 600 shots, doesn't blink an eye. And to your point, that's how he operates, and he has a purpose, he has a goal, and he's
Mhm.
going to meet that goal. And he knows that he has to do this day in and day out in order to reach that goal. Then you have other kids in there; they'll shoot 50 shots, and like, oh my God, I'm tired, I'm done.
Mhm.
And you find out. But the sad part is the kid's done, but the parents aren't. Like, all right, get back out there, give another. Why did he only get so much? But yeah, no, you make a valid point that I'm making a mental note, so you'll appreciate this. I'm going to be interviewing a former NFL player
Mhm.
who won the Super Bowl with the Denver Broncos in Super Bowl 50. And one of the things I was going to ask him about kind of what it was like, and I'm going to ask him just based on this conversation. I'm eager. This would be
Yeah.
a great idea, and I'll be sure to let you know because that's a great point you make. Because everybody's built differently.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and that's the lovely, amazing part about being human, right? Is we are not robots. We are not all the same. What works for me may not work for you. What my experience is maybe not your experience. And that's great. Like being different is lovely. Having similarities also lovely, right? And I think that's one of the hard parts about being a parent too is that our kids have some things about us that are so frustrating about ourselves. And then we see it in them, and that can be frustrating. But then they have parts of our spouse or their other parent that maybe also rub us a certain way, right? Or are lovely, right? And I think it's that mix of they are not us, right? They cannot fulfill the dreams that we did not accomplish. That is not possible because the formula that they have is not the formula we need, right? So if we want to find success in ourselves, we need to find it in ourselves, not in our kids.
Yeah, well, that begs the question because have you ever had a situation where, into your point about, a parent is, basically raising their child a certain way or their children a certain way because they want them to be something, and the child just fights it because it's not who they are,
Mhm.
but the parent doesn't take the time to find out what makes that child tick. What what is their passion?
Mhm.
I like to equate it to the like love passion thing. We all like things and we don't like things. We love things and we don't like things. But when you find that one thing that you're passionate about,
Mhm.
that's what fuels you. Like what we do. I know we're passionate about what we do. I mean, it's all I think about. Go to sleep thinking about it. I wake up thinking about it.
Yeah.
What do you do in those situations, or have you been in situations like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, I can't say that I've experienced that on the parent side of things because often those people are not welcoming me into that, although I see it, right? So like I can see it from the stands of like there's a parent that is pushing a kid who clearly doesn't want to be here like this. Um, but I don't have the opportunity to do anything about that because I try not to put myself in other people's lives if they've not asked for me to be there. But at work, I find myself noticing things to the parent to say like, "Have you noticed that Johnny just doesn't really enjoy golf as much as you enjoy golf?" And they'll be like, "No, I haven't noticed that." And I'm like, "Huh. Well, you had mentioned to me that it's really hard to get Johnny to practice. He doesn't really want to go to the golf range when, you want him to, or he's not really motivated by that. He has his girlfriend now and he really wants to spend time with her. And that's been really upsetting to you and frustrating." And they're like, "Well, yes." And I'm like, "Do you think that maybe what Johnny wants and what you want might be a little bit different?" And sometimes
Yeah.
they'll be like, "No," or whatever, "This is just, teen dating." And I'm like, "Yeah, I get it," right? Like most of us did not marry the person that we dated first. But also this is so normal developmentally to be interested in something else, right? Whether it's
Right.
another hobby or a person or an activity or whatever, it's normal for your interest to change. Are you willing to let them live into their life?
That's a great example, of asking the questions to make them what I like to call the thought-provoking questions.
Mhm.
That parents don't that aren't obvious to them because they're living in the mix of it. They don't see it. And the push sometimes is good and sometimes the push is negative, forcing the son to go, to the golf range or the golf course to hit balls and like, he's got to miss out on with hanging out with friends or girlfriend, whatever it might be. They may resent that over time if that
Mhm.
pattern continues, and you have kids that are rebellious for those reasons, and then the parents are like, "Well, it's my house, this is how I want to be."
It's being a parent is one of the most challenging jobs, right? Like we all come to this position with our own stuff, right? Even I mean, as a therapist, we have to go through so much therapy to become a therapist because we're learning the process and navigating through our own stuff to make sure that we're healthy to be able to help support people, that we're not bringing our own stuff to the table. And I think my kids still challenge me. My kids still push me to become a better version of myself. So I think growth is uncomfortable whether you're 5 or 55 or 95. I mean, it hurts sometimes, right? Like it feels like crap to have to change sometimes. And I think, sometimes we are trying to create a different life for our kids, but it's not actually what they want or need. Right. So I talk to my kids often about like, how am I doing as a mom? Do you feel like I'm supporting you in a way that helps you to love yourself and to love being part of this family and to grow and change and become like whatever you want to be. And sometimes they say yes, and sometimes they say no. Sometimes they say, "Yeah, you're not doing this part so well." And I'm like, "Thank you for your honesty." And then we talk about like what could I do differently? What could I do better for you? Because what works for me or what I might have wished that my parents did, although I had really fantastic parents growing up and they were very supportive, but there are things like my parents were definitely yellers. Like if people didn't listen, they yelled. And I was like, I am never going to yell. That is not going to be how I parent. Now, I can't say that I 100% have followed through with that. There's probably 5 times in my parenting journey so far, and our oldest is 12, that I have yelled. But, I always come back and repair because I don't want that to be like that was me having too big of feelings that I couldn't control. It was about my reaction to their reaction than their reaction. Does that make sense how that's different? It's me that's responsible
Yeah.
for that.
Yeah, I'll equate that to, I'll use the sports analogy. There's a saying, say that teams take on the personality of their coach.
Yeah.
Children take on the personality of their parents based on how they're parented.
Well, and I mean, I think, sometimes we forget, we get so short-sighted in the parenting journey of like, we're in it for the now, which, I mean, I'll be honest and say, yes, sometimes I'm in that too. Like when things are happening right in front of me and we're like having one problem after the next, like of sometimes it's like the 2-year-old put toilet paper in the sink and now the sink is flooding, right? And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, how are we going to fix this? And also the dog is there rolling in it. And now we have this, like, it's, when all the things are
One
happening,
thing after the
right?
other. Yeah.
And I'm right in that moment, right? Of like the chaos. I let it pull me in, right? But a lot of times I'm trying to like pull back and say like, okay, where am I headed? Where do I want this to go? So I have this growth perspective, this future perspective of like I want to have a deep, honest, supportive relationship with my kids. I don't hide feelings from my kids. Like when I'm having a hard time, I mean, I don't let them own it, but I say, yeah, like mommy's really sad. Like I miss my mom because my mom has passed away and sometimes that just hits me. And so, they'll say, "Oh, why are you crying? Is it something I did?" I'm like, "No. No, baby, that's not it. Like this is about mommy thinking about her mom and how much I miss her." And sometimes, they'll have something to add to that and that's normal. Or I'm upset about something. I'm like, I'm really frustrated that the dog, we have a puppy, she just went outside and I was out there with her for 10 minutes. She did all the business she needed to do and then came inside the house and pooped in the playroom. Like, what the heck? Like, yes, I'm upset, but like we do real at our house, but I'm all about because I want my kids to be real with their feelings. Like they're not going to come to me with their feelings if I'm not real with my feelings. I have to model how to do that. And then I'm thinking about, like, yes, my kids do things that disappoint me sometimes. There are things that they do that frustrate me sometimes, but they are not a disappointment. They are not frustrating. It's the behavior that they did that I feel that way about. But I'm like, hey, let's fix this together. We're in this together. We're a team. And that's how we
Yeah.
talk in our family of like, hey, we're a team. We're together. We stick up for each other. We laugh together. We do things together. And yes, as my husband and I, we're in charge of this house. And what the rule is goes. But also, like, I don't feel so strongly about most things that I'm not willing to listen to some other ideas because sometimes my kids have some really great ideas. They might have a better idea than we did. But, if it's about going to bed, that's like our firm thing, like
Yeah.
bedtime is right? Because it's also about we explain like, "Hey, we need to go to bed." Right? Like we want to spend time together because mommy and daddy getting to spend time together is really important for our relationship. And so like we have to take care of our relationship just like we take care of our relationship with you. And we take care of our relationships at work. And like these are all important things. And so you have to go to bed so that we can do this. You don't have to sleep, but you have to stay in your room. Right? So like we do have rules, we do have consequences, but it's really about being flexible. It's about being loving and caring and supportive. And then, yes, our kids know that they have to toe the line, right? Like there is the buck stops here when we say that that's how it is, but we're normally not in that modality because it doesn't really need to be that way.
That's a whole nother part of the parenting part is teaching respect and the mutual respect. You respecting their space, them respecting yours, and that's basically what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And them understanding that. And once you instill that foundation of respect and you nourish it over the years and reinforce it, you're good to go. But in some instances, it's not consistent enough in some households, and that makes it difficult, especially when the kids get older. Like you say, your oldest is 12.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've done a phenomenal job of planting the seeds, and they're sprouting in the right direction, and they're going up and not out, or in a whole bunch of different areas. I know I've had a couple parents say, I went wrong somewhere, and I'm trying to reel back in. And you made reference to something, and then this will be one of the last questions I ask you, but it's about your upbringing that you're also shifting certain aspects of, like you say, you're telling kids about missing your mom. Well, there's certain aspects, like you said, growing up, your parents were yellers, as things didn't get done a certain way. Well, you chose not to do that, but that doesn't change the fact that's still your mother. And, there's a lot of love there over the years. And I think that's the other thing the kids understand too. You're not always going to love what your parents say, but they're doing it out of love. And as long as you reinforce that you're doing it out of love and not just because I said so, there's a better chance of them understanding it and keeping that for them as they get older as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I definitely felt loved growing up, even being yelled at. I mean, it wasn't like constant, but I just know that
No,
in the
I know what you mean.
where
Yeah,
I, had done something that I shouldn't have done, I felt very like I was very critical of myself because I am a recovering perfectionist. And so I already was criticizing myself for doing that. So I didn't need additional layers of
true.
disappointment on top of that. And so I was like, yeah, that just didn't work for me. But I always felt loved, right? Like for the most part, in those moments, not as much, but the
Right.
next day or later, there was definitely, I'm sorry, or that didn't go well, or I still love you, or come here, like will you sit with me, or some type of repair of whatever happened, of like, I know you didn't mean to do that, or tell me about where you're coming from, or something like that. And I felt like that kept that love going. So I definitely felt very loved. And that's something that I wanted to continue with my kids, to know that, like, no matter what, I love them endlessly. There's nothing that they could do that would terminate that love for them.
Love for them. Yeah. No, don't get me wrong. Man, my mom was yelling in our house. My dad was a military guy. He said one thing. He never raised his voice. He didn't have to. Trust me.
Mhm.
He meant business when he said something. He only had to say it once. Whereas my mom, I think she's like hear herself talk sometimes because she's repeated. I'm sure there's a lot of moms like that. But well, Bryce, I really appreciate this conversation. I got a couple things I want to do before we head out. First and foremost is how people can get in touch with you if they would like to utilize your services or get some feedback from you. For those that are watching this, I have your email and your TikTok accounts up.
Yeah, so
Is that
accidentalexperts@gmail.com. And then we have TikTok, which is at accidental experts. And then we also have Instagram. That's the same handle as TikTok. And Facebook is just Accidental Experts with Bryce Hamilton. And then all of the podcast platforms they can listen to our podcast on, which is Accidental Experts with Bryce Hamilton.
awesome? Awesome. Well, groovy, groovy. And my final question for you would be if you could share with us the individual or individuals that have been most influential in your life and why.
Okay, so that would be two. I would say my mom is one of those people, because she always loved. She was just such a lover and giver, and she really exemplified the ideals of like what I think a strong woman is. And that was always such a good model. And she was always willing to help anybody. Like Thanksgiving at our house, Christmas at our house. If you didn't have a place to go, you were welcome with us. And that's something that I've continued in my life and really respected about her. And she was also so smart and didn't have like she didn't tell people about how smart she was. Like she just showed them, and that was always so impactful to me, of like, oh my gosh, I didn't know you knew that. Like she just knew everything. It was pretty impressive. And then I would also say I had a sixth grade social studies teacher. His name was Mr. T-Ball. and he made history come alive. And I was not interested in history whatsoever, but that was like Greek and Roman times that we talked about. And I love that period of time so much that I have been to Italy 5 times because I love that time of the world and seeing that history. But he was just such a impactful leader and teacher, and he believed in us and really empowered us and entertained us. And so he also had a great and profound impact on me.
And I always share with people the reason I ask that question is just because I like for people to understand that there are always different people in our lives that have been influenced us, some early in life, some later in life, some throughout our lives, and from inside the home, from outside the home, and everybody has a different answer. And so it goes to show you every person that comes into your life may be bringing some value to you. So take it for what it's worth and not to shun it away. So really appreciate you sharing that. One other thing I want to share with you before we go is that I co-host a podcast with my good buddy Keith Senzer. He is also a youth empowerment coach. It's a podcast called Teens Speak, Empowering Today's Youth. It's a podcast for teens, about teens, and starring teens. We have the young people that are middle school, high school, and college, and they come on and share the challenges they've gone through, but more importantly, they share the strategies that they've used to overcome those challenges, and they provide a voice for the voiceless. And also, it is an opportunity to create a safe space for young people, especially in today's social climate. It's really important for the kids to be able to know that they have a voice, and we have the platform just for that. So, if you know somebody that'd like to be a guest on Teen Speak Empowering Today's Youth, Keith and I both have a sign up sheet on our website. His is shiftyourpower.com, and mine is CoachT'sCorner.com. So, having said all that, again, Bryce, I want to thank you so much for your time, your expertise, your knowledge, your love for what you're doing. And I wish you nothing but continued success. And I know that we'll stay connected as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be here today.
Oh, absolutely. And as always, I am Coach T. I'm here to educate, support, and inspire the next generation of leaders. Until next episode, take care.
Coach T's new book, The Ultimate Guide to Success for Preteens and Teens, is the perfect resource for preteen and teen personal growth and development skills. It breaks down in detail his S.E.A. of Success program and its applications in 10 key development areas. The program applies Coach T's 3 key components: simplicity, effort, and attitude. It includes some of his success stories, as well as former and current student testimonials. Order your copy today on Amazon. Available in paperback and hardback.